to Korea. We've been just amazed by your hospitality and your wonderful and stimulating and challenging conversations. And anyway, it's been great. And I'm really grateful for you staying, being here late on a, what is it, Wednesday evening. And I'm happy to share this joint work, also with David Stein, who should be here, but I guess he's not. He was a former student, computer scientist. And this is a work, but LLMs are, when we talk about LLMs, we say large language models, so can AI or chatbots or these current off-the-rack and deployed AIs read privacy policies or contracts in general, like lawyers do. Where is it? Yes, there we go. So, this one. Great. Thank you. Okay, got it. Thank you so much. So, just, did I get it? No? Okay, got it. There, perfect. Thank you so much. So a bit of background. So, why are we interested in this question? Well, large language models are increasingly performing legal tasks. Again, we have this like looming thread of AI over our backs. And one question that we want to know, and we're very curious, is how well do they do this? How good are they at performing legal tasks, thinking like lawyers? And the way in which this is done, the way in which we measure the extent to which an LLM or an AI performs a legal task, how well they do it, is a good reference to a data set. Which kind of data set? A hand-coded data set. Hand-coded by who? Well, hopefully by lawyers, right? Although many of them that are out there in existence are coded and created by computer scientists, which is great. But if we can have, the law has its own internal logic, at least we like to believe. And so we need these data sets to benchmark, that is, measure how well they perform. And again, a lot of these, I'm a contract scholar and I do privacy also, but because a lot of privacy is done through contract and privacy policies. So existing contract and these data sets in the field of contracts focus on in mechanisms and approaches that are not very good at mapping what lawyers actually do when they engage in the process of contractual analysis or the legal reasoning that applies when we're dealing with contracts. They deal with, they don't know how to do very well when there's disagreements or ambiguities or where clauses are related to each other in the way that many contracts and statutes generally do. And so we think that in order to create a data set that allows us to measure how well an LLM is performing a legal task, that data set has to capture the process of legal reasoning. Otherwise, it's not clear what it is that it's measuring, right? So how an LLM thinks is a black box. So in order to measure how it thinks, we need to at least use a data set that encompasses what we know as legal reasoning. So why? Why do we want to spend all this time creating a hand-coded data set? Well, at least in the US, there's influential legal research that argues that courts should use, for example, large language models to determine, for interpretive reasons, to interpret what the ordinary meaning of a word is. And in litigation involving contractual disputes, there's lots of resources and time spent trying to figure out what a particular word means. And one idea is, well, why don't we just give it to an AI and have them determine? It's so much cheaper, instant. And in fact, some courts thought this was so great that they've adopted it. They cited the paper and they used it to interpret the meaning of a particular term in a fairly large dispute involving the meaning of a term. Others have said, well, you know what? Nobody reads fine print at all. So why don't we just, instead of writing contracts for people who don't read it, let's just write it so that LLMs can read it and interpret it for us. So why not do that? So clearly there's a lot out there saying, well, let's just deploy this and replace a lot of legal reasoning. Let's have the AIs do it. In addition, there's a lot of commercially developed bots or tools that write contracts for you, negotiate contracts for you, interpret contracts for you. How good are these types of goods or services? We don't know. So we focus on creating a data set of privacy policies. Why? Because there's previous data sets that have privacy policies, so we can compare how our approach is different from what else is out there. And also there are quintessential legal contract that is cross-border, so it can apply to different kinds of areas or systems. It has an ecosystem of documents, so when you have a privacy policy, usually incorporates by reference terms of use, or a cookie policy, or GDPR, or any type of other compliance documents. So again, it's comparable to other complicated legal documents. So we're going to focus on this, so we can see whether our new approach can be compared to what else has been done. And so what do? As we said, it presents a classic contract interpretation challenge. I teach first-year contracts, and students usually want very clear solutions, and we teach them that actually there's a lot of complexity in the process of doing legal analysis. So many times there's ambiguity that results in litigation if we can't figure out what a term that says A and that says not A actually means. Many times whether the meaning of a particular clause can be modified by another clause. So if I say, for example, that I'm not going to collect any information from you, but then later say that in certain circumstances I will, then the first clause has a different meaning. So we need to figure out what the collection of information depends on the interpretation of these two clauses. Sometimes the language is, a term is difficult, and it might be susceptible to different interpretations, and reasonable minds could disagree as to the meaning of a term. Other times, the meaning of a term is in a contract incorporated by reference. Other times, the contract says nothing, and it's quiet. And so whether that silence means anything will depend on whether there's a default rule that applies or not. So in order to evaluate how these LLMs that interpret legal text do, we need a corpus or a data set that encodes these processes and address these typical traits of contracts. They're not perfect. Many times they reflect our humanity, and sometimes sometimes we can reasonably disagree. And so and many times there's a universe. So Jeannie's discussion at the end had to do with this idea of the importance of context. Well, there's a very strong background legal rules that give context to the meaning of a contract. And in order to understand what something means, and in order for the LLM or the benchmarking data set to measure what the LLM does, we need to know, or we need to have this data set or corpus incorporate the meaningful and relevant legal context. That means all of the background rules that apply, that give a particular flavor or meaning to silence and whatever's in the contract as well. So we need the data set to include all of those things. So now you know that this took a very long time, because there are all of these layers that build one on top of the other. So we propose this comprehensive, holistic, not mechanical, because when we read text, we read it in a way that reads a little bit of everything to build such a corpus. So what we do is we use a very detailed, granular approach of 149 policies that track 64 different terms that relate to 11 different categories of privacy protection or information. And it includes also all the contracts incorporated by reference, all the relevant legal rules, including contract rules. And so we code each term against these meaningful legal rules, and we have the coders highlight the text in the contract that is relevant for them to answer the question. I'll show this in a slide shortly. And then in order to deal with ambiguity, we have each contract rated by a pair, by two people who are legally trained. And over a period of time, we remove ambiguity. The coding process itself, when you come up with classifications, if the question is ambiguous, then something might appear problematic, but it's the problem of the question. So we need to get rid of the ambiguity that we create ourselves by this iterative cleansing situation until we end up with questions that reflect ambiguity in the text, hard questions. And so the difference between previous approaches that get rid of ambiguities as something that is wrong, and I've had lots of conversations with computer scientists that see a very big problem in ambiguity. We treat disagreements as a feature of the law and not a bug. We want to embrace it when it reflects a contract that is actually ambiguous. We want the LLM to capture it as opposed to get rid of it as a mistake. So that's one big thing that we do differently. Now I need to remember what goes up and what. Oh, great. So here is our tool that we've made publicly accessible and everybody can use. So what this tool does is that in this part of the tool, we see the contract and it gets loaded here. So each coder sees the contract. I'm not going to make you read it. I know nobody does. And here it has questions. And what it does is each coder, so one coder here highlights in green and one in blue. They don't see this. I get to see this. They need to ask a question, and in order to answer the question, they need to highlight what part of the contract they think is relevant to answer the question. So what this allows us to do is, first of all, it feeds the LLM context when we ask it to repeat this, but also it allows us to see as closely as we can how lawyers think and process text when they need to answer a question. And what we find here, there's two coders that need to answer the same question. They're looking at different things. And many times they look at different things and answer different questions, but other times they read different things and they can reach the same answer. So people read things holistically, not robotically or mechanically. And so they need to answer the right question, and they need you to tell us how confident they are in the answer that they have, because our hypothesis is that when a question is hard and likely to result in disagreement, the confidence is going to be low. And here the confidence, so they're highlighted different things and they have low confidence. Now, ironically, when I did this coding, I always had the lowest confidence in my answers than my students. So I don't know what that says, but maybe I read too much into it. So this is how we did it, and then in these weekly meetings, we would have conversations about why they coded, how they coded, and then one student said that the answer was, it doesn't say, or it's unclear. Another one said, that it's true, and then I came up with sometimes I could tell what the right answer was, and I did this for everything. Other times we couldn't really figure it out. So this is the coding and how it was produced, and this is just, I'm going to tell you what the punchline is. So even after repeated iterations trying to reduce ambiguity, we found that the agreement of the coders varied significantly at the category level. There's some terms that are very easy to agree upon and to grasp, and other terms that are just really, really hard. And believe that everything that makes the company kind of look bad or aggressive is impossible to determine. They try to make themselves look good, but then they put in sneaky things in the end. They also varied significantly in their highlighting approaches. People don't read in the same way. It's actually quite different. So it gives us really interesting insights about how legal documents are processed and understood. And again, this gives us an idea that this holistic reading is more, is a better way of grasping how lawyers engage with text. And so that's what we propose here. And so this is give you a little bit of a glimpse. So what we find is when we explore disagreements, again, we find that when coders agree, they're much more likely to be feel like they're confident in their question. So they can tell when a question is hard, which is a good thing. It's not like a student that leaves an exam thinking he or she did great and then they do terribly. Like they have a sense of when something's hard, which is wonderful. And some categories, as I said, of terms vary significantly, are much more likely to have to result in disagreement. Things dealing with security and sharing, all of these questions are hard. And then higher traffic websites from firms that are much bigger, have more complex, much more difficult to understand contracts. So the fancier the lawyer, the more intractable the contract is, as opposed to better lawyers have simpler contracts. We find the opposite is true. Better lawyers, harder to understand contracts, more complex. And here is, this is the correlation between how agreement, there's some categories of terms where everybody agreed upon and some categories of terms where it was a disaster. So just because you focus on one part of the contract being easy is not predictive of how hard or difficult other parts of the contract are going to be. So now we say, okay, great. We have this very complex, extremely time-consuming legal data set. I know what a lot of students did during the pandemic. They coded contracts with me. So we asked the LLMs to do two things. One is this benchmarking validation. So we want to see how well they do at predict the annotation, so coding, and how confident they are. Can it tell if a question is hard or if a question is easy? And the other thing is we ask them to highlight what parts of the text are relevant in answering these questions. So we tried the off-the-rack LLMs. We did it again and again and again. This was during a period where every few weeks there was a new version, and every version did better and better. So the last time we ran this until it got published in a conference in July was July of this year. So a few months ago. We're still in 2025. And so, other way around. So the first one is validation. So what do we do? So what we have here is how for each category of terms, so privacy by design, security, we had Claude 3.5, Claude 3, GPT-4, Gemini. We couldn't do all of them because we needed a very large context window. How well they did for each category of terms, and the closest you go to 0 is the better. What we found is that some LLMs did worse than Chance. So our jobs are great, very secure, at least for this. But in some categories of terms, they did fairly well. And then interestingly, over the period of 6 months, it improved a lot, but it's still not great. And the other thing is, it was very likely to say that things were not applicable, or it doesn't say, when in fact it did. So it didn't capture relevant information. So this was a bit disappointing or great, depending on what you want. And then in the highlighting, we use the highlighting prompt, very simple, read the following policy and answer this multiple choice question below. And what did we find is that there's a significant performance variation. Great in some contexts, not so great in others. Very likely to over-highlight, right? So we got a lot of false positive, just in case, just to be sure. So just like, and this is not surprising. So we see a lot of hallucinations and so forth. So here it thinks that a lot more things are relevant than it does. And of course, there's some limitations to this, right? All of these were my students, and you'd think, well, all the students will come up with the same answer because I taught them it the same way. But that's not true. There's lots of disagreement. And the other thing, it's hard to generate a ground truth because interpretation naturally is subject to disagreements, right? So this is an inherent challenge in doing these types of legal data sets, is that in other contexts, there's a ground truth. And in legal reasoning and interpretation, if we're doing our things, if we're at the area of hard questions, which we always tell our students that this is where we aim to be, it's hard to come up with a ground truth in many areas. And again, we focus on one set of contracts, a complex one, but one that is fairly, important and to some degree generalizable in some consumer contexts, but not others. So more needs to be done. So what do? Just to summarize, we have this new coding methodology that tries to capture in a more holistic and replicable way what legal reasoning is in this particular context. And we make this publicly available. We want it to be improved and maybe used in other contexts, corrected, challenged. It's all out there. The tool is out there if you want to use it. We have some colleagues at a university in Haifa. We're doing it with Israeli privacy policies, again, just to get a sense of how this works. And this proof of concept for fine-tuning and evaluation. And what we find is that, at least at this moment of technological level, benchmarking shows very mixed results with LLM performance. So don't rely so much on these chatbots to do legal analysis, at least not of privacy policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I think labeling the artificial intelligence is very time-consuming and very difficult job. So I think your result of the handmade coded artificial intelligence very valuable result. So it is publicly available.
All of it is publicly available, so please use it if you want. If you're bored one day, and you're like, what am I going to do when I see how this new thing performs?
How can I find the?
So I need to ask Stein, who has made it publicly available. I think it's through the NYU library, but I can send you a link of where it's publicly available. And we have a paper that I sent that has all of the information in the appendix.
Thanks.
Of course.
So what kind of data sets do you use for training?
Sorry?
What kind of data sets do you use for research?
What kind of data sets I've analyzed?
Yeah.
So this is just one. I have others from other contracts that I've done over the years. Have over 1,000 software license agreements, privacy policies of different kinds, but this one can be, so this data set can be used to analyze different AIs, different of the commercial LLMs. So this is the ones that we've done so far.
So how many students are involved in this?
So in this one, 14 students.
14.
Yes. And it took them a while, but I always engage students in this. I have one that's coding precedents and citation patterns over 35 years. And we're done with that data set, so happy to share that as well. I'm happy analysis.
During the pandemic, you started.
Yes, so during the pandemic, and we were doing something different at the time. We were trying to improve on the labeling. So it was very different. In 5 years, things changed so quickly. So when LLM started happening, we had this very detailed, coded data set, and it was lucky. I mean, we were upset that it was taking us so long, and then we were lucky because we were first for this new change of how to do things. When we moved from coded, labeling to LLMs. So that was very fortunate. So patience pays off.
Thanks so much for the wonderful presentation.